I'm Candace Hopkins. I'm a curator and a writer, and I am the director of Forge Project and also the curator of Indian theater. I came across this document when I was working as a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Native Arts in Santa Fe, New Mexico. And it was amazing to me. It was authored in 1969. It's called Indian Theater, an Experiment and Process. And really what it is it's a manifesto for a new Native theater movement that was totally contemporary, totally experimental, and was also looking to certain Native traditions to make this new movement. So then I was interested in this question of, what was in the air in 1969? 1969 is the beginning of what we now call the self-determination era for Native people. And that was sparked by the occupation of Alcatraz by the Indians of all tribes in November of 1969. And they were all students at University of California, Berkeley. And what they were trying to do was really test an 1800s Lakota treaty, which had promised all federal surplus land back to Lakota people. So it was really a test of those treaty rights, but it sparked not only a national movement, but really an international movement. A lot of Canadians joined. They joined the occupation of Alcatraz, which lasted for more than a year. And it really started, I would say, not only American Indian activism, but through their work, they actually were able to successfully convince then President Nixon to stop the Federal Indian Relocation Act, which was a huge federal land grab of Native land, and then to actually further invest in Native health, in Native education. But the really interesting thing about that movement that a lot of people didn't realize is that many of those students were actually practicing theater artists. So one of the questions that I had for myself when I was organizing Indian theater was, how does this idea of self-determination and even sovereignty become an aesthetic movement? So it becomes an aesthetic movement through theater, but also through sculpture, through performance, through the ways in which we bring our histories of abstract art to painting, for example. So a beaded painting by the Lakota artist Deannie Whitehawk is a really exceptional example of that. So I think what you see in Indian theater is really how this idea of self-determination not only becomes an artistic practice, but an aesthetic language for Native artists that continues today. This exhibition includes a number of really important performance artists. James Luna is one of those. He's the late Liceño artist who spent most of his career living and working near San Diego. But in his home community, he actually worked as a counselor. And he's really famous for doing a performance called Artifact Piece. In an artifact piece at the San Diego Museum of Man, he put himself on display. So he laid in a vitrine, and the performance took place over the opening hours of the museum. And he said the hardest thing for him to do was to train himself so that it looked like he wasn't breathing. But really what that performance was doing was calling attention to the long history of not only how Native people have actually been put on display in museums, Canada also has this history, but asking that question of, what's appropriate to display? And how do we start to ask those questions, those deeper questions? So James is really famous not only for that work, but also other works that are asking provocative questions like how and when did Native culture turn into a stereotype? And how do we start to take apart those stereotypes in his work? And he often did that through humor. It's not very often in an exhibition that you can join a public secret society, but you can do that in Indian theater. You can do that by dialing 1-888-NEW-RED-1, and that is the way to join what's called the New Red Order. And the New Red Order is really asking questions about how, as Native people, we're often asked to be almost informants on our own culture. But they do this really in a way that's tongue-in-cheek. They do this with a lot of people that they say act as proxies for them and also accomplices. So not just allies, but accomplices. So in and as part of New Red Order, you can learn how good it feels to give land back, the important healing process of repatriation, learning to work together kind of as a community towards the greater good, as well as the very basis of decolonization. One of the things that I really wanted to focus on in Indian theater is this idea that for Native people, song, ceremony, dance are all interrelated. So there's a big section that focuses really on sound and music and its representation both in vinyl records, through graphic notation, various kinds of scores. But when you're in the gallery space, you can actually put on records that are part of a record label that was called Indian Records that started in the late 1960s all the way through the 70s, and really those records become a soundtrack to the exhibition. But there's many soundtracks to the exhibition. There's another series that's based on potlatch songs, particularly those sung by the late Chief Billy Assu, who's a relative of one of the artists in the show, Sonny Assu. So Sonny Assu has made a huge installation of copper records, and what he was asking himself is, for Native people, what would be the equivalent for us of the platinum record? And of course, it's the copper record for him. But he was really inspired by those early wax cylinder recordings of his great-great-grandfather, Chief Billy Assu, singing at a time when those songs that were associated with the potlatch were actually illegal in Canada under the potlatch ban. There's a section in the exhibition that was also very important to me, and that was really focusing on the idea of body and its absence. So how do we represent the body is sometimes actually through what we don't see. And a really poignant piece to that degree is by Janine Frey-Najutli, where Janine has taken their body weight in beads and represented that in a pile of beads in the exhibition, understanding that every time that piece is shown, there will inevitably be some beads that are lost. So over time, the work itself actually begins to disappear, which is a really poignant metaphor for both our agency as Native people, but also sometimes the forces that are working against us.